I just finished watching one of V's most recent videos, and in it he said something very interesting, so let's watch it together.
I just finished watching Short Fat Otaku's latest video, and in it he played a clip of vaush that I found to be very interesting. So let's watch it together.
Call it selling out your principles. I call it winning. And that's my principle. To win as a socialist, not to lose as a socialist.
Hey, funny how that all turns out. I wonder how many times I can layer the Parasite Eve background music before it becomes unrecognizable. But the part of V's video that got me thinking was when he described how if you're a known liar and suddenly need other people to believe you, you're pretty much screwed. V mentioned a few examples, like how British and German pilots during the Second World War would refrain from shooting enemies who were parachuting down from a damaged plane as an unwritten sign of respect, while when Soviet pilots took no such mercy, the Germans stopped doing it with them. He also mentioned the tranquil monk, who is capable of fighting, but would never be the one to throw the first punch. While I was watching this video, I started thinking about a conversation I had a few months ago with a particularly recalcitrant... Oh, he's been banned. Wait, he's a punished variant now. The tweets are gone, though. It doesn't matter, because if you've hung around progressives for any amount of time, you'll understand the argument even without being able to see it. The position this guy held is that people's lives are obviously worth more than property. So when a burglar breaks into your house to steal your stuff, you don't have the right to use force on him in defense of your property. In fact, it's murder if you do, because theft of property is not so horrible as killing somebody. I've noticed that when dealing with progressive ethics, the problem isn't that they're wrong. Obviously, somebody's life is worth more than an inanimate object. The problem is that they reach a shallow conclusion that fits their politics, and then they stop thinking. They don't continue to dig for the real answer. You can find progressives all over the internet espousing this position. What's more important is the reply given by me and others to his nonsense. The general consensus is, defending your family from an unknown intruder is more important than calling the police and huddling in a corner like a cuck waiting for them to arrive. Or alternatively, trying to do an accurate threat assessment and de-escalate the situation as he pulls out a gun and puts a bullet in your stupid ass. When you don't know what he's there to do, the worst case scenario isn't that you're measuring your property against his life. It's that you're measuring the lives of everybody else in the house against his. And in that case, the choice becomes clear. But because commies like to lionize poor burglars as being victims of the system, which to be fair, they sometimes are, the burglar's actions have to be inherently morally virtuous, and therefore you must be in the wrong to protect your stuff. So let's give the progressive the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that the home intruder is absolutely only there to steal your stuff, and let's say, somehow, you know this. Are you still justified in using force to stop him, even if that means he might end up dead? I remember, when I was a child and I first learned about Gandhi and his non-violent resistance, how he managed to expel the British from India and secure his country's freedom using non-violent methods. I remember as a kid how heroic that sounded. It sounded virtuous, high-minded, that his people would allow themselves to be struck down by their occupiers until they couldn't stand to do it anymore. It still sounds miraculous even as an adult, but obviously less so. Do you think if India were occupied by Nazis or Soviets, Gandhi's tactics would have worked? Of course not. Those tactics relied on the basic human decency of the British. The Nazis and Soviets would have literally just killed them all until there was not a single Indian left. I ended up losing a lot of respect for Gandhi as I got older, because the only thing we can truly learn from his story is that violence is bad. And sure, but that doesn't tell us when it's appropriate or not to use it. That's a much harder question, and Gandhi's answer was to ignore it. It's the difference between Chamberlain's appeasement of Germany and Churchill's willingness to fight them. That, plus when he started launching nukes in civilization, I figured Gandhi's day was over. The answer to that question that our progressive friend here provides, with his corn kernel brain, is that you should never risk anybody's life except to save other lives. No violence unless in response to somebody else's violence. And it sounds good when you say it like that. It provokes a righteous moral response on the surface of your personality that you can feel really good about and pat yourself on the back and say, look how much more civilized I am than these plebs. But it's not deep enough. It's not right enough. There's more thinking to do than simply what feels good and gets you Twitter likes from your friends. Let's say a police officer sees somebody breaking into a house through a window. The officer should stop the thief with as much force as is required, even if he might get killed, even if the thief is only stealing jewelry and not actually hurting anybody. Because if nobody ever so much as inconveniences the thieves, there will simply be more thieves, and the fabric of society breaks down. It becomes a far worse world to live in, where you can't trust your fellow man, or the institutions meant to protect you, or the possibility that you could work hard and save for the future. If bad people are willing to risk violence to get what they want, and good people always stand down because violence is bad, then bad people always win. This can be explained reasonably enough by game theory. True to its name, game theory is the study of strategic interactions between rational decision makers in areas with set rules and values, aka games. Its application ranges from biology to sociology to math to computer science, as it applies to animals, to humans, to artificial intelligence, and even just to regular non-intelligent computer programs. If something has a goal, a pathway to get it, and other agents with goals and pathways to contend with, you can apply game theory. The home defense situation is best modeled by hawks and doves. I'll leave a link to a video by Primer explaining it in detail how it works. You really should watch it. It's probably better than anything I've made on YouTube. But here's the basic idea. You've got a limited amount of food and you've got two creatures, hawks and doves. Hawks fight, doves don't. When two doves both attempt to get the same piece of food, they split it, so each dove gets half of the food. When a dove and a hawk both attempt to get a piece of food, the hawk bullies the dove so that the hawk gets all the food and the dove gets none of it. When two hawks both attempt to get the same piece of food, they fight over it. Fighting incurs a cost, so they each get half of the food minus the cost. We can sort the interactions like this. Hawk and hawk, they each get food divided by 2 minus cost. Dove and dove, they each get food divided by 2. Hawk and dove, the hawk gets all the food, the dove gets nothing. So if these are the rules of the game, what should you play as, a hawk or a dove? You might be tempted to choose dove because you're a pacifist cuck, or hawk because you're a chad, but the most optimum strategy actually depends on what the other players are playing. For example, if it's just you and I choose dove, you're better off choosing hawk, because then you can take everything from me every time we encounter each other. But if I'm playing a hawk, then it depends. If the cost of fighting is high enough that food divided by 2 minus cost is lower than 0, you're actually better off playing a dove. Because if I'm a hawk, when we encounter each other, you'll end up in a better position as a dove instead of a hawk. And we can keep tweaking these variables to see what kind of hypothetical society of hawks and doves we get. For example, if there's no cost of fighting at all, hawks will always drive doves to extinction. Inversely, if there's an extremely high cost to hawks fighting each other, higher than having the food stolen from you as a dove, then doves will drive the hawks to extinction. Or rather, the hawks will destroy themselves, and the doves will move into the space left behind. But what you'll find is, no matter how you adjust the variables, the population of hawks and doves will always eventually reach an equilibrium, where the population will sustain itself based on how advantageous it is to either fight or cooperate. The real world is obviously a lot more complicated than this, but the game of hawks and doves can be applied to any social interaction where there is risk and reward associated with both fight and flight. And the lesson we can take away is, if a society is set up such that theft is more profitable than reaction to theft is detrimental, then that society will be overrun by thieves. And in case you think I'm just babbling a whole bunch of theory out my ass and that has no application in the real world, we are already seeing this play out in real time. Back in 2014, California reclassified shoplifting valued at $950 or less from a felony to a misdemeanor, and unsurprisingly, shoplifting has increased. Videos routinely go viral of people stealing just under that amount, knowing that security guards won't stop them, cops won't be called, and if the cops are called, a misdemeanor isn't exactly high priority. If a society makes the punishment for stealing this low, if it's more profitable to steal than to work honestly, people will steal. And if enough people are stealing and not working, then they're not producing, meaning that there's nothing left to steal and eventually society collapses. The counter-argument to this is that society can sometimes make theft too punishing, or innocence can get swept up in the hysteria of crime fighting. And that can happen. But firstly, that's no reason to swing across to the other extreme, to say theft is good actually, especially from the crowd that says that employment and profit are theft. And secondly, it's been my experience that radicals of all types, progressive and reactionary, left and right, doesn't matter. They completely forget about the existence of the golden mean. Yes, a society that is too strict is bad, but so is a society that's too lax. When a libertarian says government regulation makes everything worse in all possible situations, and the socialist says the free market leads to ruin in all possible situations, they're both making the same mistake. They're ignoring the golden mean. Government can ruin things. The free market can ruin things too. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And the same goes for theft and law enforcement. All of this being said, if you wake up in the middle of the night and hear a burglar prowling around, you're probably not thinking any of this extended political stuff. You're probably thinking about how to defend your family, which means you're thinking about game theory, even if you don't know it. You don't know if the burglar is a hawk or a dove, so your response will be based on the cost of fighting. If the burglar is a dove, then regardless of the cost of fighting, you should be a hawk, because if you fight, the burglar will give up or run away. If the burglar is a hawk, then suddenly it becomes unknown what you should do. If you're a dove, will the burglar just take your stuff and leave? Or will he kill you? Will he kill everybody else in the house? If you're a hawk, what will be the cost of fighting with another hawk? It's all entirely unknown, but one thing becomes clear. The possibility of losing everything, not just your stuff, but your life, your family's life, if you choose to play as a dove, is on the table. If the cost of playing as a dove versus a hawk is higher than the maximum possible cost of two hawks fighting, then regardless of the damage you both might do, being a hawk is always the better choice. In other words, in a room full of doves, hawks destabilize things, but in a room full of hawks, being a hawk is your only shot at survival. And in a room full of unknowns, in almost every situation, it's better to be a hawk. Progressives just don't think this way. They say what sounds good and moral and will get their friends to accept them, but they don't really go beyond that. And you know what? I can make a good solid moral argument for home defense too. The people in the house depend on me and defending them is more important. My property represents the labor I perform to build or buy it, making me a slave if you steal it from me. But I don't even need to appeal to morality to refute the progressive position. Even in the most rational, scientific, materialist view of things, which I'm sure the prog will appreciate more than something like honor. As long as you have others depending on you, whose lives mean more to you than your own, it will always be more worth it to defend them than to risk them. The mindset of the person who thinks otherwise seems to be the mindset of the person who doesn't have anybody that they view as worth defending.